The door to the basement was iron, a cold, imposing barrier on the Thornhill Estate in Burke County, Georgia. When Union soldiers forced it open in 1864, the light fell on 23 children huddled together in the darkness. Their ages ranged from 4 to adolescence, but they all shared the same hauntingly distinct features: high cheekbones, pale green eyes, and auburn hair streaked with gold. The sight was both beautiful and unsettling, a gallery of faces that seemed more like siblings than a random assortment of the enslaved. The eldest, a girl of 13, whispered something to the officers that would turn the stomachs of veteran soldiers. "The mistress says we are her legacy. We cannot leave because we are her blood." This confession was so disturbing it was confined to a single, confidential letter from the 34th Massachusetts Infantry, buried in regimental archives for more than a century, a secret deemed too vile for public consumption. Local histories of Burke County have entirely scrubbed the Thornhill Estate from their pages, as if the plantation and its mistress were nothing but a phantom. But they were real. And what Katherine Thornhill constructed in the 16 years between her husband's death and the arrival of federal troops stands as one of the most horrifying chapters in American history, a systematic breeding program designed to create generations of enslaved people who could never escape, bound to their owner by genetics. It was a perversion of family, a grotesque mockery of motherhood, all engineered for perpetual control. If this story is making your skin crawl, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to excavating the darkest corners of American history, the stories they never teach in schools, the secrets moldering in courthouse basements and forgotten archives. I want to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment with your city or state. Are you near Burke County, Georgia? Does your own town harbor buried secrets like this? Let's uncover them together. Now, let's journey back to where this nightmare began. To a cold February morning in 1847, when a young widow inherited a dying plantation and conceived a plan that would haunt Georgia for generations. The winter Katherine Danforth Thornhill buried her husband was the coldest Burke County had witnessed in 2 decades. The Thornhill Estate sprawled across 1,700 acres of tired, red clay soil 7 miles southwest of Waynesboro. By 1847, this was cotton country in decline, the land exhausted and the plantation squeezed by falling prices. The estate, once successful, was now mortgaged to the hilt, its fields barely producing enough to feed the workers. Creditors circled like vultures, their letters piling up on her late husband's desk. Katherine was 28, a widow left with a failing inheritance and a 16-year-old stepson, Richard, who regarded her with something close to hatred. He was a bookish, sullen boy who seemed to his stepmother weak and dangerously sentimental, more interested in poetry than profit. The plantation itself was a picture of decay. The main house's paint was peeling, the roof leaked, and the enslaved population lived in a state of constant fear, knowing more of them would likely be sold to settle the mounting debts. Presented with bleak options by the estate's lawyer, sell everything or face certain ruin, Katherine conceived a plan born of cold, desperate logic. If she could not afford to purchase workers, she would breed them. But not in the haphazard way of other plantations, where increased births were a happy economic accident. Her vision was far more systematic, more controlled, and infinitely more cruel. She would create a workforce biologically tied to the estate, children who could never be sold because they were her own descendants, bound to Thornhill by blood. It was a monstrous idea, but to Katherine, it was elegant, a perfect, self-perpetuating solution. She began a journal, written in a simple cipher. Children were seedlings. The men she selected were rootstock. Pregnancies were plantings. Her first selection was a man named Isaac, valued for his strength and steady temperament. What transpired between them was recorded in her journal with chilling detachment. First planting completed with rootstock 1. Awaiting germination. Richard, her stepson, soon grew suspicious. He overheard a hushed, tense conversation with the local midwife, Miriam Grayson, and the timing of Katherine's subsequent pregnancy did not align with his late father's illness. He discovered the coded journal hidden in a false bottom drawer of her writing desk and, after painstakingly deciphering it, was horrified by the breeding charts and cold calculations he found within. When he confronted Katherine, her response was not denial, but a veiled threat. Family loyalty, she warned, was everything, and disloyalty had consequences. Soon after, Richard began to fall ill, fatigue, headaches, muscle weakness. Katherine insisted it was consumption, nursing him herself with special tonics she prepared. Richard, however, a keen student of chemistry, recognized the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. In a final, desperate act, he wrote a letter to his grandfather in Savannah, exposing the truth of his stepmother's pregnancy and the contents of the journal, but a house servant, loyal to Katherine out of fear, betrayed him. She burned the letter in front of him. Richard Thornhill died on December 3, 1847. The official cause was consumption. Just days later, Katherine gave birth to a son, claiming he was premature and naming him Jonathan after her late husband. From 1848 to 1856, Thornhill Estate underwent a seeming miracle of recovery. Cotton production increased, the workforce grew, and debts were paid down. But this efficiency was built on a foundation of horror. Katherine gave birth to 4 more children, each with a different, carefully selected enslaved father. Miriam Grayson, now richly compensated for her silence, ensured this program continued, often providing abortifacients to enslaved women whose pregnancies fell outside of Katherine's designs, ruthlessly pruning the family tree to her specifications. Katherine's own children occupied a strange, liminal space. Legally enslaved, they were registered as children of enslaved women, yet they lived in the main house, wore better clothes, and were even taught to read and write by Katherine herself. She told them they were fortunate orphans she had taken in, a charitable act from a benevolent mistress. She was grooming them, preparing them for the next phase of her plan, to become the overseers and matriarchs of this new, incestuous dynasty. The men used as rootstock suffered profound psychological torture. They were fathers to children they could never acknowledge, never parent, children who called another woman mother and who were taught to see their own father as just another slave. Resistance was met with brutal punishment, either for them or for their loved ones. The entire enslaved population understood the grim pattern unfolding, watching with a kind of horrified anticipation as the mistress's children, with their distinctive looks, began to populate the main house. By 1859, as the nation fractured over slavery, Katherine's focus remained myopically fixed on her legacy. She constructed a heritage room in the mansion, a windowless shrine to her breeding program. Its shelves held her coded journals, vials of hair samples from each child, and elaborate charts mapping out future pairings for generations to come, a cold, scientific blueprint for a human harvest. The war brought disruption. The overseer enlisted and died at Shiloh. News of Union victories and the Emancipation Proclamation filtered into the quarters, kindling a desperate hope. Katherine, sensing this shift, tightened her control. She pushed her eldest children into early pairings. Jonathan, at 15, was married to a 16-year-old named Rachel, another of her biological children, though he did not know it. But the carefully constructed lies were beginning to crack. Eleonora, Katherine's second-born daughter, a curious and intelligent girl, discovered and decoded one of the journals. The truth shattered her world. The woman she called her guardian was her mother, and she was nothing more than a planned component in a breeding experiment, her future husband likely her own brother. When Eleonora confronted her, Katherine's response was a cold ultimatum: cooperate and maintain your privileged position, or be sold down the river into a far worse situation. Eleonora, however, shared the terrible truth with her siblings. The knowledge spread, changing the atmosphere in the main house from one of confused privilege to one of simmering betrayal. A quiet, desperate rage began to build in the quarters. A public, brutal whipping of a young woman who tried to run away did not quell the unrest, but instead clarified the stakes. Katherine was afraid. The breaking point came on the night of March 17, 1864. With the Confederacy collapsing and Sherman's march imminent, Katherine gathered her 11 biological children in the Heritage Room. Fearing the imminent end of her world, she produced bottles of laudanum, proposing a horrific solution: to poison them all to protect them from the chaos of freedom and preserve her legacy intact, a final, terrible act of ownership. Her children, for the first time, united against her. Jonathan stood between his mother and the others. "You are a monster," he told her, his voice steady with a rage he had long suppressed. Realizing she had lost them, that her blood had finally turned against her, Katherine made a final, desperate decision. She would at least preserve the evidence of her grand design. She snatched up her journals and charts and fled the house, running toward the quarters, perhaps to hide them, or perhaps in a final, delusional attempt to command the situation. What happened next is known only in fragments, pieced together from whispers and the account the children later gave to the soldiers. Katherine Thornhill disappeared that night. Her journals were found scattered and destroyed, the pages torn and muddied. Her children, arriving at the quarters, found chaos but no sign of their mother. An older woman named Hope, a cook who had seen generations of Thornhill cruelty, told them simply, "She's gone and she ain't coming back." They understood. They let it rest, knowing that the land itself, and the people who had worked it, had rendered their own verdict. The official report stated she had likely fled from advancing Union troops. But everyone knew the truth. Justice, of a kind, had been delivered in the dark. After the war, the estate fell into ruin, its fields reclaimed by pine and scrub oak. The freed population scattered, carrying their stories with them. In 1871, a skeleton was discovered in a collapsed well on the former Thornhill property, a woman, killed by blunt force trauma, with a locket containing portraits of a man and a young boy. She was buried in an unmarked grave, her name lost to the county records. The 23 children discovered in the basement were freed and placed with families across Georgia and the Carolinas. Their ultimate fates are lost to history, their names changed, their pasts buried. But their descendants are likely alive today, carrying Katherine Thornhill's genetic legacy, the high cheekbones, auburn hair, and pale green eyes, utterly unaware of the brutal, calculated system that brought them into being, a living, breathing monument to a horror that was almost forgotten. The story of Thornhill Estate was suppressed, omitted, and whispered, but it persists in the soil and in the bloodline. It is a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty when empowered by absolute control, and a testament to the resilience of those who endured the unendurable, and who ultimately ensured that the architect of their nightmare would be erased by the very history she sought to command. What do you think? Has the full truth been revealed, or do secrets still lie buried in that Georgia soil? Some stories belong to the people who endured them, and they chose to carry certain truths with them to their graves, a final act of defiance. If this story has moved you, share it. Subscribe for more journeys into the darkest chapters of our past. The past is never as distant as we would like to believe. See you in the next video.